Hi, my name is Tim Owens, and welcome to the Psychology of Everyday Success. We're excited to have you. Normally, I'm here with my wife, Jennifer, and she's actually doing this with me if you've been paying attention to our broadcasts. But today I'm flying solo. Jennifer's involved in doing some really, really important things today, some of which we'll probably share with you down the road. But in any case, you have me today. So wanted to talk today about 12 things you should know if someone you love uses drugs. 12 things you should know if someone you love uses drugs. So now, what would that have to do with the psychology of everyday success? Well, what's true is that drugs are at an epidemic in our society, really, literally all over the developed world. It's true, unfortunately. And the likelihood that even if you don't use drugs, the likelihood that you know somebody or have close relationship with someone who uses drugs is extremely high. You may not even know that they use drugs, but eventually that can come into play. And what's true is that if you're not careful, the closer you get to them, the likelihood that their drug use will impact your life in negative ways is significant. So want to talk about the 12 things you should know if someone you love uses drugs. So let's just dive right in. The very first thing is that the drug itself is typically the symptom and not the problem. The drug is the symptom and not the problem. What do I mean by that? Well, in the same way that if you go to try to let's say you have a cold, right? A head cold or the flu. And you feel like that if I can just get rid of my runny nose, right, then I'll be fine. No, that's not true. What happens is that, of course, there's a bug that has infected your body. And until you deal with the actual root cause of the runny nose, you can wipe it as often as you want, but the runny nose is still going to come back, right? So in the same way, drugs are really the symptom of the problem and not the actual problem. So what is the real problem? The real problem I've learned in my 30 plus years in this field is unresolved trauma. Unresolved trauma, traumatic life experiences, and typically those that happen in childhood. Now you're likely to say, "Oh, I had a great childhood," or there was no problem with my childhood, and that's probably true. Right, but we tend to normalize trauma in our childhood. So what may feel normal to you may not actually be normal, or may not actually be healthy. Let's put it that way. So unresolved trauma. So let me give you an example. Let's take little John, for instance. Little Johnny is let's say he's 6 years old, and he lays awake in bed at night, afraid, because he knows that about 2 a.m, especially on the weekends, about 2 a.m, his dad's going to come home from the bar, and he's going to be drunk, and he's going to be angry, and he's going to be violent, and he's going to come looking initially for little Johnny's mom. He's going to start there, and then when he's finished with little Johnny's mom, he's going to come looking for little Johnny. So what does a 6-year-old do with that kind of trauma? Well, what happens is he buries it deep within him. He buries it deep within him, and he promises himself that no matter what happens, he is not going to be like his dad when he grows up. But if we fast forward 20 years down the road, what's little Johnny doing? The same thing his dad was doing. As a matter of fact, why was little Johnny's dad doing that? Is because his dad likely did it before him. So it's unresolved trauma, right? And traumatic life experiences. That's the first thing you should know. The drug typically is the symptom and not the problem. Yes. So the second thing you should think about is the problem didn't start recently. It didn't start with the person who is 30 years old and now addicted to opiates because he got a shoulder issue at work. or had some back pain and was prescribed too many opiates. It typically doesn't start there. There are people who have that experience, but typically what I find is that most of the substance use that most of my patients have, or my clients have tend to come actually started around age 12. That's when they actually started using, was about age 12. So it didn't start recently. It's kind of built up to this point. So, but that's an important thing to keep in mind. So the drugs typically is the symptom and not the problem. The problem didn't start recently. The third thing is the problem didn't start with them. As we mentioned earlier, Lil Johnny's dad and his dad before him encountered the same problem. The issue is it's intergenerational, and so it's much deeper than we tend to think. It's not just about his use. So the fourth thing is they really do have a real brain disease. This is a disease. Often a lot of people tend to think about substance use as actually a problem, just a failure in someone's ability to do the right thing, a moral failure. But what's true is that it's actually a brain disease, and it's lodged sort of in the amygdala, the fear center of the brain. It's kind of where the disease of addiction is kind of centered, or at least that's at the very least where it's triggered most. So what happens is that my fear center gets activated, and what people who use substances do is they actually deal with the problem, or they try to deal with it through their pleasure center in the brain. And so of course that's a short-term fix. It doesn't work that way long term. It really needs to be dealt with in the thought center, which is what we should tend to help people to do with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So essentially, though, it is a brain issue. And what happens is that people who with substance use addiction develop a dysfunctional relationship with dopamine, the pleasure chemical. So the issue is that if I'm afraid, if I'm fearful, if I'm anxious, if I can just feel enough pleasure, things will go away. I won't have to think about it. I won't have to deal with it in the way that I would normally otherwise have to deal with it. I can escape. I can alter the state of my consciousness. So understand that they really do have a real brain disease. They're not faking. They're not just being bad or having a moral failure. That's really what's going on. There's some real issues in their brain. So number 5, they are not a failure. Often we tend to think about substance use as this person failed. But let me just ask this. So if someone had cancer, right, an actual physical disease, someone had cancer, and the cancer, they beat it initially, but then the cancer came back. There was a reoccurrence of the cancer. Would we say, oh, that person failed? No, they didn't. It's just their disease. That's part of the disease process. Sometimes there is reoccurrence. We've begun calling now relapse in substance use in the field actually reoccurrence, because that's part of the disease process. What they have is a legitimate brain disease, and they're typically doing the best that they can to overcome it. The vast majority of the folks I know who experience addiction are doing the best they can to do the best they can. So love on them and don't shame them. The number 6, they usually have an extremist approach to most things in life, right? Go big or go home. It's all or nothing. It's black or white. What they need is to learn balance. Right. So that's the first 6 things. The drug is typically the symptom and not the problem. The problem didn't start recently. The problem didn't start with them. Number 4, they really do have a real brain disease. Number 5, they're not a failure. And number 6, they tend to use extremist approach to most things in their lives. The seventh issue is the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. It is connection. Most of the time, what happens is that isolation drives addiction. So connection is actually what actually helps to make it better. So that's number 7. Number 8, shaming them and isolating them actually makes it worse. When we shame them, we isolate them, we actually make it worse. Literally, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. Number 9, we usually attract people in our lives who are at the same level of mental and emotional health as we are. So there's a reason that, it's not the pot calling the kettle black. We're all in this together, yes? Number 10, codependence is real. In codependence, there's the person who needs, and then there's the person who needs to be needed. So if you are not the person who is most needy in the relationship, it is often the fact, if you're in a codependent relationship, that you are the person who needs to be needed, which has its own set of challenges and problems. So number 11, addicts need someone to support their addiction. In the field of addiction, we talk about family systems of addiction. So there is the enabler, there is the hero, right? The person who everybody looks up to in that family system. There is the mascot, the person who keeps everybody laughing. There's the lost child, the person everybody's kind of centered around taking care of. And there's the scapegoat, the person who the family puts all of the problems of the family on and says, if it weren't for you, we blame you, we shame you, our family would be better. And then of course there is the addict. So that's 11. The 12th one is that you should not work at the relationship harder than they do. Don't find yourself working at the relationship harder than they do. It takes time. Healing takes time, and it takes courage, and it takes patience. So be patient with both them and yourself. So in the little time we have remaining, I want to recap. So the 12 things you should know about if you love someone who uses drugs. 1, the drug is typically the symptom and not the problem. 2, the problem didn't start recently. 3, the problem didn't start with them. 4, they really do have a real brain disease. 5, they're not a failure, especially if they keep trying. 6, they usually have an extremist approach to most things in their lives that they need to learn balance. 7, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it is connection. 8, shaming them and isolating them makes it worse. 9, we usually attract people in our lives who are at the same level of emotional health as we are. 10, codependence is real. 11, addicts need someone to support the addiction. And 12, you should not work harder at the relationship than they do. God bless, and we'll talk soon.